Okay, Victor, so let's touch on infrastructure spend. We're talking about government infrastructure spending. We know there's a lot of promises that are coming through. A lot of the construction companies are focusing on what's happening outside of South Africa. So let's set the scene. Ex-South Africa, things looking quite good. Here, we're starting to see some green shoots.
Yeah, certainly. Think about it, Eleni. We are not going to have another 2010 where we will have many stadiums to build, lots of highway improvement projects. So South Africa will be recovering. It is recovering, but the recovery is really more exciting outside of South Africa. And so it should, because if that happens, then South Africa even stands to benefit. South Africa is beginning to lead investment into the rest of the continent. If you saw the Ernst & Young Africa Attractiveness Survey 2 weeks ago, it shows that on the African continent, South Africa is leading in greenfield projects going into the rest of the continent to invest. And infrastructure is going to be the base. It's going to lead everything, because with infrastructure comes an ability to trade. And if you think about the East African community, if you think about the free trade area that everybody's talking about, that will give you access to about 300 million people or so, is about infrastructure. So it is promising. And if you look at it, I mean, people who know will tell you a growth in the economy almost is matched, if not slightly exceeded, by a growth in expenditure on things like cement, on things like infrastructural development.
Absolutely. I mean, this has been one of the key focus areas. And again, we just focus on ex-South Africa. Let's just delve into the South African market quickly before we delve further into the rest of the African continent.
Yeah.
What is your expectation for infrastructure spend here in South Africa? Are you seeing government making good on a lot of its promises? We know cement sales are up, so this is obviously good for PPC, but we haven't recovered, and we're still not seeing cement manufacturers going back to the capacity that they were at prior to the crisis.
You know, speaking for government might be a little too risky, because you cannot know. This is election year or in the build-up.
What have you seen filtered through, though, Victor, by way of business?
Yeah, but that's what I mean. There are provinces that are not doing as well, like the Western Cape in terms of cement sales even, but there are projects that are going to do well. Rural provinces, Eastern Cape, if you look at Limpopo, if you look at the Northwest, if you look at the Free State, those will have to improve, because the infrastructure is not as great as in the provinces like Gauteng. But overall, even the Bureau for Economic Research at the Stellenbosch University anticipates that the recovery will be there, below 5% growth, but it is growth nonetheless.
Absolutely. So within Africa, what do you foresee as the biggest growth areas? And are we looking at economies that are very much linked to resources? We know it's all about consumers. We're looking at landlocked countries as well that would require that railroad, as you were alluding to. Trade barriers need to start softening up, and infrastructure can assist with that.
I mean, think about in the Southern African region, I think you have to talk about Mozambique and Zimbabwe. Mozambique, because of the coal business that's just booming out there, and with that coming a lot of infrastructure. And when I say Mozambique, I'm not talking more about Maputo. I'm talking about the north, the Tet province, Nampula, those kind of provinces that are in the north, which is where the bulk of the investment in the coal mining has been. And then, of course, you have to think of Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe continues to discover more and more mineral capacity, more and more reserves, and it is beginning to link up to the rest of the sub area. And of course, although the political situation is still a bit anxious, investors are beginning to move back in. Airlines are flying into Zimbabwe, and there are signs that the economy is growing. They were anticipating the economy to grow by 9%. Last week, the Minister of Finance, Tendai Biti, admitted 9% might be a little too high. They couldn't meet their revenue targets. They expected 800 or so million US dollars. They made 700. So it's not doom and gloom in Zimbabwe, but the growth is not going to be as exciting as it used to be. So Mozambique and Zimbabwe, to me, are the countries
the biggest growth areas,
and they'll spill over, of course, into Malawi and Zambia.
Okay, so how much of a risk is this Eurozone crisis for you and this China slowdown for you? Do you think that it's going to hamper infrastructure spend in the African continent?
It shouldn't, because if you think the reason the Euro crisis is a problem for us is more for the exports, as in what we export to them. If you talk about a country like Kenya, 33% of the roses bought in the UK or in Europe are from Kenya. So if you are exporting, whatever you are exporting to the Eurozone will be under threat. Infrastructure, on the other hand, tends to attract investment inward. And as I said, because South Africa and other emerging markets are beginning to lead this greenfield expansion projects, it's not going to be a threat.
Okay, so what about funding?
Funding, of course, remember, infrastructure is funded by a variety of sources, including the African Development Bank.
Yeah.
The IDC locally has
Is there enough firepower within these development banks to fuel this demand?
There's definitely enough. African Development Bank, over 60% of their funding going into infrastructure. They are a very credible organization. I mean, even in countries like Burundi, there are the likes of the DBSA emerging out there that are showing that there will be a lot of development. Infrastructure is going to be a growth area for a very, very long time to come.
Fantastic, Victor. We have to leave it there. Thank you so very much.
It's been a pleasure.
Enjoy the rest of your Africa Day. How do you say goodbye in your language?
Inshallah.
Yes, there we go. I'm not going to repeat that. Thank you, Victor.